The snowstorm had come out of nowhere, wrapping the remote town of Everly Hills in an unexpected, fierce embrace. Heavy flakes cascaded from the darkening sky, quickly covering the winding mountain road leading to the exclusive Alpine View Hotel, making travel nearly impossible. Thatcher Kingsley tightened his grip on the wheel of his sleek black Mercedes, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior as he navigated cautiously along the icy roads. Accustomed to control and order, he hated surprises, especially inconvenient ones like this. Thatcher, the renowned CEO of Kingsley Industries, had planned this quiet mountain retreat carefully, aiming for solitude to review important company contracts in peace. Now, all he saw was chaos. As the hotel came into view, nestled elegantly against a backdrop of snowy peaks and dense forest, relief flooded him momentarily. But it was short-lived, replaced instantly by irritation as he noticed the crowded parking lot and the bustling lobby visible through the large glass entrance. Parking his car with difficulty, Thatcher stepped out into the biting cold, pulling his heavy black coat tighter around himself. Snowflakes dusted his dark hair, accentuating the sharp, handsome features that had often graced business magazine covers. He strode toward the lobby with purpose, determined to secure his reserved suite quickly and escape the cold. Inside, the hotel buzzed with activity. Guests milled around, some clearly agitated by the unexpected storm that had trapped them in the hotel. Thatcher's sharp blue eyes scanned the chaos until he zeroed in on the check-in desk, where a visibly flustered receptionist struggled to handle a frustrated young woman. Thatcher approached just as the woman, slender and strikingly beautiful, leaned forward, her voice edged with barely controlled annoyance. "I reserved a room weeks ago. You can't possibly tell me there's been some mistake." The receptionist, a young man named Elliot according to his gold-plated name tag, offered an apologetic yet anxious smile. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Everhart, but due to the avalanche blocking the highway, we're fully booked. Several guests can't leave, and we've run out of rooms." Callista Everhart crossed her arms, trying desperately to maintain composure, though panic flickered briefly in her emerald green eyes. Her delicate features tightened, making her look both vulnerable and fiercely determined. "This is unacceptable," she insisted firmly. "There must be something you can do." Thatcher, now standing behind her, cleared his throat, his tone calm but authoritative. "I have a reservation under Thatcher Kingsley. Surely there isn't an issue with my suite?" Elliot looked up nervously, recognizing the name instantly. "Mr. Kingsley, sir," he stammered apologetically, "your suite is indeed available. It's actually the last available room." Callista spun around sharply, eyes blazing with disbelief and frustration. "Are you serious? His room is available, but mine isn't." Elliot shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Everhart, I apologize deeply, but Mr. Kingsley's suite is the only remaining accommodation. The storm was unforeseen." Thatcher met Callista's fiery gaze, immediately struck by the intensity he found there. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her spirit, her unyielding defiance, that intrigued him. However, his priorities were clear, and he intended to waste no further time on distractions. He reached into his jacket, withdrawing his credit card to secure his reservation. Callista, sensing defeat, turned away with a heavy sigh, shoulders slumping slightly, the fight momentarily draining from her. Thatcher hesitated, an unexpected pang of sympathy tugging at him. He normally didn't concern himself with the problems of strangers, but something about her quiet distress gave him pause. "Wait," he spoke suddenly, surprising even himself. "How large is the suite?" Elliot brightened cautiously. "It's our largest luxury suite, sir. It has a private sitting area, 2 separate sleeping areas, though only 1 bedroom." Thatcher glanced reluctantly toward Callista, who watched him suspiciously, clearly uncertain of his intentions. "Perhaps," he continued calmly, "given the circumstances, Ms. Everhart and I could share the suite for tonight." Callista's eyes widened, clearly stunned by his unexpected offer. "Share a suite?" she echoed incredulously, color rising slightly in her cheeks. I don't even know you. Thatcher raised an eyebrow calmly, not particularly pleased himself but trying to remain pragmatic. True, but given the circumstances, our choices appear limited. She hesitated, weighing her options carefully. The thought of sharing close quarters with a total stranger, albeit a disturbingly attractive one, was unsettling. But the storm outside was intensifying, leaving her little choice. Reluctantly, she nodded, offering Thatcher a wary glance. Fine, but this is strictly out of necessity. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her boundary. Of course. Elliot quickly processed their unusual arrangement, clearly relieved the situation had resolved without further conflict. Minutes later, Thatcher and Callista rode silently up the elevator, each acutely aware of the awkwardness permeating the confined space between them. When they finally entered the lavish suite, the opulence of the room momentarily distracted them from their discomfort. Plush carpets, rich mahogany furniture, and a stunning panoramic view of snow-capped mountains greeted them, presenting a striking contrast to the tense silence between them. Callista moved toward the window, gazing out at the stormy landscape, clearly attempting to regain composure. Thatcher watched her carefully, unexpectedly drawn by her elegance, even in moments of distress. Realizing he was staring, he cleared his throat softly, reclaiming his usual cool demeanor. Since we're forced into this arrangement, he began pragmatically, we might as well establish some ground rules. She turned to him sharply, eyes flashing defensively. Ground rules? He offered a faint smile, meant to reassure but inadvertently heightening her irritation. Simply to ensure mutual comfort. I understand your hesitation, Ms. Everhart. Believe me, this isn't exactly how I planned my evening either. She sighed softly, tension gradually easing from her posture. Callista, she corrected quietly, finally conceding a small smile. If we're sharing a suite, you might as well call me by my first name. He extended a hand politely, the gesture surprisingly warm. Thatcher. She took his hand reluctantly, immediately aware of the jolt of electricity that passed between them at their brief touch. She withdrew quickly, heart pounding inexplicably. Thatcher, equally startled by the sensation, masked his surprise with practiced ease, stepping away to create physical distance. I suggest we get through tonight with as little awkwardness as possible, he said evenly. I'll sleep in the sitting area, you can take the bedroom. Tomorrow, hopefully, the roads will clear. She nodded gratefully, relaxing slightly at his offer. Agreed. But as night fell heavily over Everly Hills, bringing with it stronger winds and heavier snow, neither Thatcher or Callista could foresee how profoundly this forced proximity would alter their lives. For now, the luxurious suite felt oddly intimate, their shared silence charged with something unspoken, something they both sensed yet refused to acknowledge. As they prepared separately for the long night ahead, each wondered privately what fate had planned by throwing them together in such unlikely circumstances. Neither could imagine the chain of events this single, snowy night would soon set into motion, nor how deeply and irrevocably their lives were about to intertwine. Outside, the storm intensified, pelting thick snowflakes against the large panoramic windows of the suite, the howling winds rattling the glass like a restless ghost. Inside, the luxurious hotel room was quiet, save for the occasional pop and crackle of logs burning softly in the grand stone fireplace. Thatcher stood silently in the spacious sitting area, staring into the dancing flames with an unreadable expression, his strong jaw tight with unease. The unexpected intimacy of sharing a suite with a total stranger unsettled him far more deeply than he cared to admit. In the adjoining bedroom, Callista carefully unpacked a few essentials from her overnight bag. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed a silk nightgown onto the large, ornate bed, silently cursing the situation she'd found herself in. Callista prided herself on her fierce independence, her resilience born from a complicated childhood. But now, alone in an isolated mountain lodge, trapped by nature's fury, she felt an unfamiliar vulnerability that disturbed her deeply. Sighing heavily, she glanced around the elegant bedroom. Soft golden light cast delicate shadows across the luxurious furnishings, creating an atmosphere far too romantic for comfort. She shook her head sharply, determined to suppress any foolish thoughts. Thatcher Kingsley was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience, she reminded herself firmly, a handsome, irritatingly self-assured inconvenience. Minutes later, she emerged hesitantly from the bedroom, finding Thatcher still standing by the fire. Hearing her footsteps, he turned to face her, his gaze quickly assessing, unreadable yet undeniably intense. "Everything all right?" he asked, voice calm yet tinged with cautious politeness. Callista nodded slightly, crossing her arms defensively. "Perfectly fine, considering the circumstances." An awkward silence followed, each feeling acutely aware of the charged tension lingering between them. Thatcher cleared his throat softly, attempting to break the uncomfortable moment. "Perhaps we should try to make the best of the situation," he suggested, moving toward a small, elegantly stocked minibar. "Would you care for a drink?" Callista hesitated briefly before nodding in reluctant agreement. "A glass of wine would be nice." Thatcher poured 2 glasses of rich, red wine, handing one carefully to Callista. Their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange, sending a fleeting yet undeniable spark through them both. Callista quickly withdrew her hand, taking a hurried sip of wine to hide her embarrassment. Thatcher watched her carefully over the rim of his glass, his calm facade barely masking his curiosity. After a moment, he spoke quietly, voice measured yet sincere. "Since we're stuck together, maybe we should at least attempt conversation. Unless you'd prefer silence." She hesitated, eyes flickering toward his face as she considered. "All right," she finally agreed softly. "But maybe we keep things simple. No personal questions." He smiled faintly, settling onto one end of the plush sofa near the fireplace, gesturing for her to join him at the opposite end. "Fair enough." As they began cautiously discussing neutral topics, the fierce weather, local traditions, trivial matters that posed no emotional risk, the awkwardness between them gradually softened. Callista found herself surprised by Thatcher's wit and intelligence, his subtle humor easing the tension in her shoulders. Thatcher, too, discovered Callista's vibrant mind captivating, her gentle laughter slowly eroding the walls he'd so carefully constructed around himself. Hours slipped by unnoticed, their conversation shifting naturally from surface-level pleasantries to deeper insights into each other's minds. Despite their earlier agreement, small, intimate details began slipping through: Callista's passion for art, Thatcher's hidden love of classical music, brief glimpses into personal lives they'd initially intended to guard closely. As the evening wore on, Thatcher felt an unexpected, powerful desire to understand this woman he'd stumbled upon in the strangest of circumstances. Unable to help himself, he finally posed a question he'd been carefully avoiding. "Why are you here, Callista? A remote mountain lodge seems an unlikely destination for you." She paused, eyes shadowed with hesitation. Then, choosing her words carefully, she spoke softly. "I needed space, to think, to escape my life for a while. I suppose I was hoping to find clarity here." "And you?" Thatcher glanced toward the fire, his expression suddenly vulnerable. "Something similar, actually. Business has always consumed my life. I hoped solitude might provide perspective." She watched him quietly, sensing the weight behind his admission. "And now you're forced to share your solitude with me," she said gently, a faint smile curving her lips. He chuckled softly, his usual stoicism momentarily replaced by sincerity. "Strangely, I find I don't mind the company as much as I thought I would." Their eyes locked suddenly, the air between them thickening with a new, undeniable tension. Thatcher swallowed hard, breaking their gaze reluctantly. "Perhaps we've both had enough wine for tonight." Callista nodded slowly, understanding but slightly disappointed. Rising gracefully from the sofa, she moved toward the bedroom, pausing at the doorway to glance back at him briefly. "Good night, Thatcher." "Good night, Callista," he murmured, voice low and filled with unexpected warmth. Yet once alone, neither found sleep easily. Thatcher lay restlessly on the sofa, staring into the dying embers of the fire, Callista's face haunting his thoughts, the memory of their brief connection unsettlingly powerful. Meanwhile, Callista lay awake in the expansive bedroom, heart racing inexplicably, trying desperately to deny the overwhelming attraction she felt toward a man who, until mere hours ago, had been a complete stranger. It was long after midnight when Callista finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreams blurred with images of Thatcher's intense gaze and gentle smile. Suddenly jolted awake by a sharp crack of thunder echoing through the mountains, she gasped softly, momentarily disoriented. The storm outside had intensified, wind shrieking fiercely around the hotel. Unable to settle her nerves, she stepped quietly out of the bedroom, approaching the sitting area hesitantly. Thatcher sat awake on the sofa, alert and troubled. Seeing her, he rose immediately, concern evident in his eyes. "Callista, are you all right?" She shook her head slightly, vulnerability clear in her expression. I couldn't sleep. The storm." Without hesitation, Thatcher crossed the short distance between them, gently guiding her toward the fireplace, rekindling the flames to provide warmth and comfort. Together, they sat silently in front of the fire, each feeling profoundly aware of the closeness they now shared. Finally, unable to suppress the impulse any longer, Thatcher turned toward her gently, voice filled with unexpected tenderness. "Callista, I don't know what's happening here, but I can't deny it any longer. I've spent years carefully controlling every aspect of my life. But tonight, in this strange, impossible situation, all of that feels meaningless. All I know is, sitting here with you, I don't want to fight it anymore." Heart racing, Callista lifted her eyes to meet his gaze, emotions mirrored clearly between them. "Neither do I," she whispered softly. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Thatcher reached out, gently cupping her face, drawing her close until their lips met softly in a kiss filled with cautious, unspoken promise. The storm outside faded into insignificance as they surrendered willingly to the undeniable connection fate had unexpectedly placed before them, oblivious to everything but the surprising, powerful bond forged in the heart of a snowstorm. Morning dawned softly over Everly Hills, the fierce storm having finally passed, leaving the landscape outside draped in a pristine blanket of snow. Pale golden sunlight filtered through the expansive suite windows, casting delicate patterns across the plush carpet and elegant furniture. Thatcher awoke slowly, consciousness seeping back to him alongside memories of the previous night, memories vivid enough to quicken his pulse and make his heart tighten with unfamiliar anxiety. He turned his head slightly, immediately aware of the warmth beside him. Callista lay asleep in his arms, her dark hair cascading over the silk pillows, her expression peaceful and serene. Thatcher's chest constricted at the sight of her, beauty and vulnerability intertwined in a way that deeply affected him. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to savor the quiet intimacy, resisting the harsh intrusion of reality. But his rational mind quickly asserted itself, cold logic returning with brutal clarity. His life was meticulously organized, every step carefully calculated. Relationships, especially sudden and complicated ones, had no place in his world. His heart hardened slightly as he reluctantly disentangled himself from Callista, sliding carefully out of the bed and quietly retrieving his clothing. Across the suite, Callista stirred slightly as Thatcher left, sensing the loss of warmth. Slowly, her eyes fluttered open, confusion and then realization flooding her expression. Memories of their passionate night together rushed back, making her heart race and her cheeks burn. But her hopeful excitement quickly dimmed upon noticing Thatcher's absence beside her, replaced by a sinking feeling of embarrassment and uncertainty. She dressed hurriedly, nervous anticipation knotting her stomach. Exiting the bedroom, she found Thatcher standing near the panoramic windows, fully dressed, his expression cool and distant. He turned slightly at the sound of her footsteps, meeting her gaze briefly with detached politeness. "Good morning," he greeted calmly, voice carefully devoid of emotion. Callista hesitated, confused by his sudden aloofness. "Good morning," she replied softly, uncertainty clear in her tone. Is everything all right? He nodded, expression carefully controlled. Perfectly fine. It seems the storm has cleared, and the roads should be passable soon. We can each continue our journeys. Callista felt an unexpected pang of hurt at his dismissive tone, a sharp contrast to the tenderness they'd shared hours before. She struggled to mask her emotions, lifting her chin proudly. Of course. Last night was an unexpected situation, nothing more. Thatcher glanced away briefly, hiding the flicker of regret in his eyes. Precisely, he agreed coolly. Considering our positions, it's probably best forgotten. Agreed, Callista said, voice tight, pride preventing her from revealing how deeply his words stung. The awkward silence stretched painfully, broken finally by the ring of Thatcher's cell phone. Grateful for the distraction, he answered sharply, immediately reverting to his commanding CEO persona as he moved away to speak privately. Callista stood silently near the windows, staring out over the snow-covered mountains, heart heavy with disappointment and confusion. She'd foolishly allowed herself to believe that their shared night had meant something deeper. Now, confronted with Thatcher's obvious desire to forget, she felt foolish and vulnerable, two feelings she fiercely despised. Minutes later, Thatcher ended his call, turning toward Callista, carefully avoiding eye contact. I must leave immediately. There's an important charity gala in town tonight, and my attendance is crucial. Callista forced a polite smile, hiding her hurt behind practiced composure. Of course. Safe travels. He hesitated briefly, almost as though he might say something more, then thought better of it. With a curt nod, he turned and left the suite, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Callista alone and unsettled. Throughout the day, Thatcher's mind returned unwillingly to Callista, the softness of her gaze, the warmth of her touch, the vulnerability she'd shown him in their quiet, intimate moments. Frustrated by his inability to push her from his thoughts, he immersed himself fully in business preparations, desperate for distraction. Night arrived quickly, bringing with it the lavish charity gala at Everly Hills Grand Ballroom. Thatcher, impeccably dressed in a tailored black tuxedo, arrived alone, his presence immediately capturing attention. Wealthy donors and business leaders approached, eager for conversation, yet he moved through the room mechanically, his mind stubbornly focused elsewhere. Then, unexpectedly, he saw her. Across the crowded ballroom, Callista stood near an ornate marble column, breathtakingly elegant in a deep emerald gown, her dark hair styled loosely, framing her delicate features beautifully. Thatcher's breath caught painfully in his chest, heart suddenly racing, emotions surging uncontrollably. Their eyes met, an intense, wordless exchange passing between them. Unable to resist, Thatcher moved toward her, his carefully maintained distance crumbling with each step. Callista watched warily, uncertainty flickering in her emerald eyes as he approached. Callista, he greeted softly, unable to hide the tenderness slipping into his voice. I didn't expect to see you here. She raised an eyebrow cautiously. Neither did I. This event wasn't exactly on my radar, but my plans changed. Thatcher hesitated, conflict evident on his face. About this morning. She interrupted swiftly, tone guarded. There's no need, Thatcher. We agreed to forget it. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. What if I don't want to forget? Callista's eyes widened slightly, heart skipping unsteadily. But this morning, you said. I was wrong, he admitted softly, vulnerability evident. I reacted poorly, trying to protect myself. The truth is, you haven't left my mind all day. Her defenses softened slightly at his admission, confusion mingling with fragile hope. Thatcher, I don't know what to believe. He gently took her hand, heart racing as he felt her fingers tremble slightly beneath his touch. Believe this, I can't pretend last night meant nothing. Maybe this is complicated and risky, but I refuse to ignore what I feel when I look at you. Callista's resolve weakened, eyes searching his face for sincerity. Finally, quietly, she admitted, I felt it too, Thatcher. But your distance this morning hurt me. He nodded slowly, regret clear. I was afraid, Callista. I don't let people in easily. But something about you makes me want to try. Her gaze softened further, cautiously hopeful. What are you suggesting? He smiled faintly, voice gentle yet firm. A chance, to explore whatever this is. No expectations, no pressure. Just honesty. Callista studied him carefully, heart pounding wildly, before finally nodding slowly. All right, Thatcher. A chance. Relief flooded his expression as he squeezed her hand gently. Then let's begin tonight, by enjoying this evening together openly. She smiled softly, warmth blossoming in her chest. I'd like that. Together, they stepped into the crowded ballroom, drawing curious glances from guests who recognized Thatcher immediately. Yet, for the first time, he ignored their scrutiny, his attention fully focused on Callista. As they shared conversation, laughter, and lingering glances throughout the evening, Thatcher felt barriers he'd built for years slowly begin crumbling, replaced by something infinitely more genuine, something real and powerful that scared yet exhilarated him. Neither knew where this connection would ultimately lead, nor the challenges awaiting them. But for tonight, amid glittering lights and gentle music, they allowed themselves the simple joy of possibility, two hearts cautiously surrendering to an undeniable bond that fate had woven intricately into their lives. In the days following the charity gala, Thatcher and Callista spent more and more time together, their cautious exploration evolving rapidly into a deepening bond neither had anticipated. With each passing day, their initial hesitations faded, replaced by warmth, laughter, and the thrilling excitement of discovering someone genuinely intriguing and emotionally captivating. Yet beneath the blossoming romance lingered the uneasy feeling of a secret past waiting to emerge. One cold afternoon, Thatcher found himself in his expansive downtown office, high above the bustling streets of Manhattan. Though typically immersed in business affairs, today his thoughts drifted repeatedly toward Callista. He leaned back in his leather chair, gazing absent-mindedly at the sprawling skyline, allowing himself to admit just how powerfully she'd captivated him. Suddenly, his private intercom buzzed insistently, shattering his thoughts. His assistant's voice echoed cautiously, Mr. Kingsley, your investigator is here with an urgent update. Thatcher straightened immediately, tension rippling through his posture. Weeks ago, driven by instinct and his cautious nature, he'd quietly instructed a private investigator to discreetly look into Callista's background, not from suspicion, but from an ingrained need to control outcomes. Now, guilt stirred within him, yet curiosity propelled him forward. Send him in, Thatcher replied calmly, masking his internal turmoil. Moments later, Daniel Marlowe, a trusted investigator, entered the office. The older man's expression was tense, eyes shadowed with hesitation. Thatcher gestured toward a chair, maintaining outward composure. You found something. Daniel nodded slowly, reluctantly placing a thick dossier on Thatcher's polished desk. Callista Everhart is Roland Everhart's daughter, the same Roland Everhart who destroyed your father's company 2 decades ago. Thatcher's entire body tensed, disbelief and shock coursing through him. His mind reeled violently at the revelation, suddenly flooded by painful memories. Roland Everhart had indeed been the ruthless corporate raider who had crushed Kingsley Industries, plunging Thatcher's family into financial ruin, and forcing his father into premature retirement and shame. It had been the darkest chapter of his life, a betrayal he'd spent decades overcoming. Voice icy with restrained fury, Thatcher looked up sharply. Are you absolutely certain? Daniel nodded grimly, expression apologetic. There's no mistake. Callista was born and raised apart from Roland's corporate life. Her mother moved her to Europe after divorcing Roland when Callista was just a child. It's possible she's unaware of your shared history. Thatcher felt anger and hurt churn within him, emotions he'd spent years burying suddenly resurfacing violently. He clenched his jaw tightly, eyes narrowing. Thank you, Daniel. That will be all. Once alone, Thatcher paced the spacious office, agitation surging through him. Was Callista genuinely innocent, oblivious to their painful past connection, or had she approached him intentionally? The possibility of manipulation cut deeply, fueling a bitter suspicion he struggled desperately to suppress. Later that evening, Callista sensed immediately upon entering Thatcher's apartment that something was terribly wrong. Thatcher stood rigidly near the window, gazing coldly out at the glittering city lights, a noticeable tension radiating from him. She approached cautiously, heart pounding anxiously. "Thatcher, what's wrong?" He turned sharply, eyes blazing with hurt and suspicion. "How long were you going to hide the truth from me, Callista?" She stepped back slightly, startled by his accusatory tone. "Truth? Thatcher, what are you talking about?" Voice hardened, he took a step toward her. "Your father, Roland Everhart. The man who destroyed my father's legacy and nearly tore my family apart. Did you honestly believe I wouldn't discover who you were?" Callista's eyes widened in shock, face paling instantly. "Roland Everhart is your enemy? Don't pretend you didn't know," he snapped bitterly. "Was all of this, our entire relationship, some twisted attempt to manipulate me on behalf of your father?" Stung deeply by his harsh accusation, Callista shook her head fiercely, tears burning her eyes. "How dare you suggest that? I barely know Roland Everhart. He abandoned me and my mother years ago. I was raised far from his world. I had no idea about your family's past." Thatcher hesitated briefly, the sincerity of her pain momentarily piercing his anger. Yet wounded pride and deep-rooted mistrust hardened him once more. "Forgive me if I find that difficult to believe." Callista's expression shifted from hurt to fiery defiance, pride asserting itself fiercely. "If that's what you truly think of me, Thatcher, then perhaps this entire thing was a mistake." She turned sharply, grabbing her coat and storming toward the door, heartbreaking at his devastating lack of trust. Before leaving, she glanced back, voice trembling with restrained emotion. "I thought we had something genuine, but clearly, I was wrong." The door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing painfully through the apartment, leaving Thatcher alone and shaken. As he sank onto a nearby sofa, regret surged violently through him. He'd allowed suspicion to destroy the one good thing he'd found in years, Callista's genuine affection. Guilt clawed painfully at him, yet pride prevented him from chasing after her. Days passed slowly, each hour agonizingly empty. Thatcher's usually sharp business instincts dulled as his mind remained consumed by Callista, haunted by regret and uncertainty. Determined finally to know the full truth, he dove deeply into the investigator's report, scouring every detail with obsessive intensity. What he found stunned him deeply. The records confirmed Callista's innocence beyond doubt. Raised far from Roland Everhart's ruthless corporate manipulations, she'd indeed spent her childhood and adulthood disconnected from his poisonous legacy. The pain in her voice, the shock on her face, had been genuine. She truly had no knowledge of their bitter past. Shame and remorse flooded Thatcher intensely, regret overwhelming his pride. Realizing how unjustly he'd accused Callista, he knew he had to find her immediately, apologize sincerely, and beg forgiveness. However, attempts to contact her were met with silence. Callista had vanished, unwilling to grant him further opportunities to hurt her. Frantic yet determined, Thatcher personally traveled to her last known apartment, only to find it empty, devoid of her belongings. Neighbors confirmed she'd moved suddenly, destination unknown. Panic and desperation grew within him, realizing the depth of the damage he'd inflicted. Returning home defeated, Thatcher's once orderly life felt hollow and meaningless. He'd destroyed the fragile trust they'd built, pushed away a woman who had genuinely touched his heart, all because he'd let his painful past cloud judgment. Alone, heartbroken, and filled with remorse, he vowed silently never to give up searching for Callista. Days turned to weeks, yet Thatcher persisted tirelessly, utilizing every resource at his disposal. Finally, a break appeared. A trusted associate reported seeing Callista in New York, attending a high-profile business conference alongside a man named Preston Whitmore, a powerful investor notorious for ruthless tactics. Jealousy and suspicion ignited immediately within Thatcher. Was Callista moving on already, aligning herself with someone equally ambitious yet far less trustworthy? Thatcher's instincts screamed danger, prompting him to immediately book a flight to New York. Arriving at the elegant conference venue, Thatcher spotted Callista quickly, elegant yet guarded, eyes shadowed by sadness. Beside her stood Preston Whitmore, his cold, calculating demeanor immediately raising alarms in Thatcher's mind. Determined to protect Callista and reclaim her trust, Thatcher strode confidently toward them, interrupting their conversation boldly. "Callista, we need to talk," he insisted gently, voice filled with sincerity. Callista hesitated, eyes wide in shock, clearly torn between her lingering pain and undeniable relief at seeing him. Before she could respond, Whitmore interjected sharply, stepping protectively closer. "I believe the lady's with me, Kingsley," Whitmore sneered condescendingly. "And after your treatment of her, I doubt she wants anything to do with you." Callista looked sharply between the two men, heart racing anxiously. Yet Thatcher's eyes held hers firmly, silently pleading for a chance to explain. Voice steady and determined, Thatcher faced Whitmore directly. "I suggest you let her speak for herself. Callista deserves to know the full truth, about everything." Callista studied Thatcher carefully, sensing sincerity in his words, confusion mingling with fragile hope. Finally, softly yet firmly, she spoke, "All right, Thatcher. Let's talk." Relief surged through Thatcher intensely. Gently taking her hand, he guided Callista away from Whitmore's watchful gaze, determined now to protect her from harm, reveal all truths openly, and finally earn her trust, whatever the cost. Thatcher guided Callista carefully away from the crowded ballroom and into a secluded lounge within the luxurious New York Conference Hotel. Dimly lit and furnished elegantly, the quiet room provided a perfect refuge from the chaos outside. Thatcher's heart pounded anxiously as he gently closed the door behind them, leaving them alone for the first time since their devastating confrontation weeks before. Callista stood near a large window overlooking the dazzling city lights below, tension evident in her slender frame. Arms crossed protectively, she glanced at Thatcher warily, uncertainty mingling with lingering hurt in her emerald eyes. "You wanted to talk," she said quietly, voice carefully controlled. "So talk." He approached her slowly, heart heavy with remorse and desperation. "Callista, first I owe you an apology, a profound one. I judged you unfairly, accused you unjustly, and I deeply regret it." She studied him cautiously, vulnerability flickering beneath her guarded exterior. "What changed your mind?" Thatcher met her gaze directly, sincerity clear in his voice. "After you left, I realized how terribly I'd misjudged you. I investigated further and learned the truth about your past, your genuine innocence. You had no idea about our family's rivalry, and I allowed my anger and past pain to blind me." Her expression softened slightly, curiosity emerging alongside cautious hope. "And do you believe me now, Thatcher?" He stepped closer, gently reaching out but hesitating, afraid she might pull away. When she didn't, he carefully took her hands, feeling them tremble slightly beneath his touch. "Without question. And I promise you, Callista, I will never doubt you again. I let old wounds cloud my judgment, but I won't make that mistake again, not with you." Callista's eyes filled with unshed tears, emotions finally breaking through her carefully constructed defenses. "You really hurt me, Thatcher. I'd begun to trust you, and then suddenly, you accused me of terrible things." "I know," he admitted painfully, his voice raw with genuine remorse. "I can't erase the past. But please, Callista, give me a chance to prove I've changed. Allow me to earn your trust again." She hesitated, eyes searching his face, before finally nodding slowly. "I want to trust you, Thatcher. But I'm scared. What if something else comes between us?" Thatcher squeezed her hands gently, determination clear. Then we face it together, openly, honestly. No more secrets or suspicion. Callista sighed softly, leaning into him cautiously, allowing his strong arms to gently embrace her. For the first time since their painful separation, she felt the tension in her chest ease slightly. "I missed you," she whispered softly against his shoulder. Thatcher held her tighter, relief flooding him intensely. "I missed you too, more than I ever imagined possible." Their fragile reconciliation was suddenly interrupted by the sharp ringing of Callista's cell phone. Reluctantly stepping back, she glanced at the screen, face immediately darkening with tension. "It's Preston Whitmore," she murmured cautiously. Thatcher stiffened immediately, suspicion and protectiveness surging fiercely. "Callista, what's your relationship with Whitmore?" She sighed, hesitant yet honest. "After I left your apartment that night, Whitmore approached me at another event. He offered support, career guidance and business mentorship. He seemed harmless, professional." Thatcher's expression darkened further, voice firm yet gentle. "Callista, Whitmore is dangerous, ruthless. I have reason to believe he's using you to get to me and possibly your father." Shock flickered across her features, disbelief evident. "What makes you think that?" Thatcher hesitated briefly before continuing carefully. "Since seeing you here with him, I've had my investigators examine Whitmore more closely. He's been involved in shady investments, manipulations, and unethical dealings. He has an obsessive vendetta against both Roland Everhart and me, fueled by jealousy and personal grudges." Callista paled visibly, anxiety growing. "You believe he's targeting me as leverage?" Thatcher nodded grimly, voice protective. "I'm certain of it. Whitmore never acts without an ulterior motive. Your association with him endangers you. Please, Callista, distance yourself immediately." Before she could respond, urgent knocking echoed suddenly against the lounge door, interrupting them sharply. Thatcher moved protectively in front of Callista as he opened it cautiously. Outside stood Preston Whitmore himself, flanked by two intimidating security guards, eyes narrowed in cold suspicion. "Callista," Whitmore spoke icily, voice dripping with thinly veiled threat. "We have important matters to discuss privately. I suggest you accompany me now." Thatcher stepped forward immediately, body tense with protectiveness. "Callista isn't going anywhere with you, Whitmore. I know your game, and it's over." Whitmore's expression twisted bitterly, eyes flashing dangerously. "Careful, Kingsley. You've already lost enough due to your arrogance. Don't make matters worse." Callista moved beside Thatcher, facing Whitmore calmly yet defiantly. "I won't go anywhere with you, Preston. Whatever your intentions were, I want no part in your manipulations." Whitmore's expression hardened fiercely, voice dropping menacingly. "You'll regret this choice, Callista. Both of you will." With that chilling threat, Whitmore turned abruptly, disappearing swiftly with his guards, leaving Thatcher and Callista alone, tension thickening the air around them. Thatcher faced Callista urgently, voice determined yet gentle. "He'll try something soon, we must be ready. Please, Callista, trust me completely now." She nodded anxiously, feeling deeply shaken yet comforted by his unwavering strength. "I trust you, Thatcher. Completely." That evening, after returning safely to Thatcher's Manhattan penthouse, they carefully discussed next steps, planning meticulously, strengthening security measures, and solidifying their bond through open communication. Their relationship deepened quickly under pressure, intimacy growing from shared adversity and mutual reliance. Yet, despite their careful precautions, danger lingered menacingly. Days later, while shopping alone briefly, Callista was suddenly approached aggressively by two strangers, Whitmore's henchmen. Without warning, they grabbed her roughly, pulling her toward a waiting vehicle nearby. Panicked yet defiant, Callista struggled desperately, fighting fiercely but ultimately powerless against their strength. As she was forced into the car, fear and helplessness overwhelmed her. At his office, Thatcher received a chilling call from Whitmore himself, calmly informing him of Callista's abduction. Whitmore's demands were clear: Thatcher was to surrender confidential company information and publicly humiliate himself and Roland Everhart, or Callista would suffer. Terrified yet filled with fierce determination, Thatcher refused Whitmore's terms immediately, instead mobilizing his vast resources instantly, launching an urgent rescue mission involving security teams, investigators, and law enforcement allies. Every second counted. Hours later, after frantic searching, Thatcher's team traced Callista's location, a hidden warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Thatcher personally led the dangerous operation, risking everything to ensure Callista's safety. Inside the darkened warehouse, Callista remained tied but defiant, courageously facing her captors. When Thatcher and his team burst in dramatically, swiftly overwhelming Whitmore's men, relief flooded her instantly. Freed, Callista rushed desperately into Thatcher's arms, sobbing with overwhelming relief. He held her tightly, heart pounding fiercely, whispering promises of safety and devotion. Whitmore, cornered and defeated, was swiftly apprehended by authorities. Their traumatic experience solidified Thatcher and Callista's bond deeply, erasing lingering doubts completely. Safely reunited, they pledged unwavering commitment to each other, determined now to face future challenges together openly and courageously. Though danger had briefly threatened their newfound love, it ultimately strengthened their connection profoundly, leaving no doubts remaining. Together, they stood firmly united against any adversity, confident that honesty, trust, and genuine love would forever guide them safely forward. In the hours that followed the dramatic rescue, the world outside the penthouse seemed to slow to a heavy, uncertain beat. The tension that had gripped Thatcher and Callista during the operation gradually gave way to a quiet, reflective silence. Back in the warmth of Thatcher's meticulously decorated Manhattan apartment, the two sat side by side on a deep, burgundy sofa, still shaken by the events of the night. Outside, the city lights pulsed rhythmically, a distant reminder that life continued unabated despite moments of personal peril. Thatcher's mind raced with conflicting emotions: relief, anger, and an ever-deepening love that now intertwined with an urgent need for answers. Callista's tear-streaked face, now resting against a soft cushion, spoke volumes of the terror she had endured, yet also of the fierce resilience that had seen her through. For a long while, neither spoke. They simply sat in the quiet, sharing the space as if their hearts could somehow heal the wounds inflicted by Whitmore's betrayal. Finally, Thatcher broke the silence, his voice low and resolute. "We can't let this happen again," he said, his gaze fixed on the fading remnants of adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "Whitmore's actions were calculated, designed not just to hurt me, but to use you as a pawn in his twisted game." His knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest, his jaw set in determination. Callista slowly lifted her eyes to meet his, vulnerability mingled with newfound strength. "I know," she whispered. "I'm still scared, Thatcher. I feel violated, not just physically, but in every sense. I trusted you, and now this darkness, it feels like it's reaching into every corner of my life." He leaned forward, taking her hand in his with a tenderness that belied the storm raging inside him. "I promise you, Callista, I will do everything in my power to ensure your safety. I will expose every piece of Whitmore's web of deceit until it unravels completely." His voice, steady and unwavering, conveyed a commitment that transcended the immediate danger. Over the next few days, the couple immersed themselves in a relentless pursuit of the truth. Thatcher convened meetings with his most trusted advisors and security experts, their discussions held in hushed tones behind locked doors in sleek boardrooms. Detailed reports, intercepted communications, and financial records were scrutinized as he pieced together the extent of Whitmore's operations. Every detail revealed further layers of betrayal, not only implicating Whitmore but hinting at a network of conspiracies that stretched far beyond what he had initially suspected. Late one evening, as rain tapped persistently against the tall windows of his office, Thatcher sat before a sprawling array of documents spread out on a mahogany desk. The soft hum of the city provided a constant, distant backdrop while he worked with almost obsessive concentration. Each report, each snippet of evidence, was a step closer to unmasking the true motives behind Whitmore's aggression. His mind wandered to Callista, and with each memory of her bright smile and unwavering courage, his determination grew stronger. He was not only fighting for his own legacy, he was fighting to protect the woman who had become the light in his otherwise cold, corporate existence. Meanwhile, Callista spent long hours in quiet reflection at a small cafe near the hotel, often accompanied by a notebook in which she scribbled her thoughts and fears. She wrote about the surreal sequence of events that had transformed a single night of forced proximity into a battleground of trust and betrayal. Her writings, raw and unfiltered, became a personal chronicle, a testament to her struggle to reconcile her past with the uncertain future that lay ahead. In these moments of solitude, she found clarity. The fear of being manipulated was still present, yet there was a deep-seated resolve growing within her, one that whispered that she was stronger than the forces arrayed against her. One particularly stormy afternoon, when the city was cloaked in a veil of gray and the air tasted of rain and determination, Thatcher and Callista met at a discreet location, a small, quiet park nestled between towering skyscrapers. Beneath the rustling branches of an ancient oak, they talked openly, unburdening the weight of the last few days. Thatcher shared his findings about Whitmore's links to corrupt financial dealings and hinted at a more disturbing possibility, that Whitmore might have been acting under orders from someone even higher up, someone with a personal vendetta against the Kingsley name. Callista listened intently, her eyes narrowing in thought. "You think there's another player here? Someone who wants to see you fall?" she asked softly. Thatcher nodded, his face dark with the seriousness of his suspicions. "It's possible. Whitmore's methods were too precise, too calculated to be his alone. I've noticed discrepancies in financial records that suggest someone was funneling funds, manipulating markets, and using Whitmore as a proxy to target me. I fear the roots of this conspiracy reach further than we ever imagined." The gravity of his words sank in, and for a long moment, they sat in silence, the only sound the gentle whisper of the wind through the trees. Callista's heart pounded in her chest, torn between fear and the fervor of a budding resolve. "Then we have to act," she declared firmly. "We need to expose them, whatever the cost. I won't let anyone, no matter how powerful, dictate our lives or tear us apart." Thatcher's eyes softened with a mixture of admiration and relief. "You're right. We must turn the tables. I'll use every resource available to me to dig deeper. And I need you by my side, Callista. I need your courage, your insight, your heart. Together, we can overcome this." In that moment, standing amid the quiet resilience of the park, their hands intertwined and their souls bound by a shared purpose, they made a silent vow. They would fight for their love, for truth, and for justice. Every sleepless night, every moment of fear, would be transformed into a stepping stone toward a future where they could live without fear of manipulation or betrayal. As the day gave way to dusk, casting long shadows across the park's ancient paths, Thatcher and Callista returned to the safety of their penthouse. The ensuing hours were a blur of strategy sessions, phone calls, and clandestine meetings with allies, loyal employees, trusted investigators, even a few renegade insiders from the financial sector. Each revelation brought them closer to unmasking the sinister network that had threatened to upend their lives. Yet amid the chaos of this covert crusade, their personal connection blossomed further. Late at night, when the city was quiet and the relentless hum of business faded into a soft murmur, they found solace in each other's arms. In whispered conversations by the glow of bedside lamps, they shared dreams and regrets, hopes and fears, revealing parts of themselves that had long been hidden behind layers of corporate armor and guarded independence. It was in these intimate moments that they realized the true strength of their bond lay not in grand declarations or calculated maneuvers, but in the simple, genuine commitment to face uncertainty together. Their love, born out of a single fateful night in a snowbound hotel, had grown into a fierce and enduring force, capable of challenging even the most powerful and corrupt adversaries. And so, as Chapter 6 drew to a close, the world outside continued its relentless pace, unaware of the silent revolution unfolding within the hearts of two determined souls. Thatcher and Callista, now united by more than circumstance or survival, prepared themselves for the battles yet to come, confident that their love, tempered by hardship and proven in the crucible of danger, would light the way toward a future defined by truth, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to each other. Late one rainy night, when the city's neon glow barely penetrated the thick veil of storm clouds, Thatcher and Callista met in a secluded, dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of Manhattan, a makeshift headquarters where their most trusted allies had gathered to finalize the next phase of their plan. The space, filled with scattered documents, laptops humming with encrypted data, and half-empty coffee cups, bore witness to countless sleepless hours spent chasing elusive clues. Every corner of the warehouse seemed to echo with whispered conspiracies and quiet determination. Thatcher stood at the head of a long, scarred wooden table, his usually steely gaze now softened by exhaustion and resolve. He reviewed a series of reports one last time, running his finger along a printed ledger that detailed suspicious transactions linking Preston Whitmore to a shadowy network of financiers. Callista, seated beside him, watched intently as lines of evidence began to connect the dots between Whitmore's seemingly isolated criminal activities and a larger, more sinister scheme that threatened not only their personal futures but also the legacies of both the Kingsley and Everhart families. "We've managed to expose Whitmore's operations to some degree," Thatcher said quietly, his voice low and steady. "But there's one more piece missing, a direct link to the higher-ups who have been pulling the strings behind the scenes." His eyes lifted from the papers, locking with Callista's. "If we can expose that connection, we can bring this entire corrupt network crashing down." Callista nodded, determination burning in her eyes. "I've been cross-referencing family histories and financial records from the Eldridge archives. There's an unaccounted-for transfer of funds, massive sums, that points to someone within my father's circle, someone who isn't just a bystander. We suspect a betrayal from within, don't we?" Thatcher's jaw tightened as he recalled the unsettling hints of duplicity in earlier reports. "Yes. It appears that not only has Whitmore been using you as leverage, but one of our own trusted associates may have been feeding him information. I'm beginning to suspect that someone very close to us has been compromised." A heavy silence fell over the room. The air was thick with tension, and even the persistent patter of rain against the warehouse's corrugated roof couldn't drown out the collective anxiety. One of their aides, a sharp-eyed financial analyst named Miriam, cleared her throat softly. "I've found irregularities in the transaction logs that point to an account managed by someone within our team, a shell account that seems to have siphoned off funds meant for our security upgrades and operational expenses. The numbers don't add up, and all signs point to an insider leak." Thatcher's eyes narrowed as he processed Miriam's words. "It must be someone we trusted implicitly," he murmured bitterly. "Someone who's been working against us from the inside. This betrayal not only endangers our plan, it endangers all of us." Before any further discussion could take place, a series of encrypted messages began flooding in on the secured laptop at the center of the table. The screen displayed urgent warnings, each message more chilling than the last, demands for Thatcher to surrender confidential information and instructions to halt the investigation immediately. The messages were signed with a single ominous initial, a stark reminder that the traitor was still very much at large. Callista leaned forward, her voice trembling with both anger and resolve. "This is their final warning. They're trying to intimidate us into silence." She met Thatcher's gaze, her eyes fierce with defiance. "We can't let them win. We need to identify the traitor and expose the mastermind behind this entire operation." Thatcher stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the concrete floor, and began pacing the room as his mind raced. "I've always prided myself on controlling every variable. I can't believe I let this happen in my own team. We must act quickly." He paused, his expression hardening with resolve. "I'm going to re-examine all our communications and personnel files. Every minute we waste could give them the upper hand." Miriam interjected, "I'll run a full audit of our data logs and cross-reference every digital footprint. We need to know who has been in contact with Whitmore's channels and when. It might be painful, but this betrayal must be exposed." The team sprang into action, working feverishly into the night. Outside, the storm intensified, as if mirroring the turmoil within the warehouse. Under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights and the relentless hum of computers, secrets began to unravel. A series of timestamps and IP addresses emerged from the tangled network of data, and slowly, a pattern became undeniable. One name recurred too often, a trusted operations manager whose demeanor had always been too quiet, too agreeable. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. This individual had been accessing restricted files at odd hours and had mysteriously disappeared from scheduled meetings for days at a time. Thatcher's heart sank as he realized the extent of the treachery. "We have our suspect," he said grimly, sharing a look with Callista that was heavy with both sorrow and steely determination. "It's Jameson. I never imagined one of our own would betray us like this." Callista's face hardened, her voice barely a whisper as she responded, "Then we must confront him. We must ensure that every piece of evidence is in order before making our move." As dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale light on the warehouse's grim interior, Thatcher and Callista, along with Miriam and a couple of loyal team members, prepared to confront Jameson. They arranged a discreet meeting in a quiet, neutral location, a deserted cafe on the outskirts of the city, where anonymity could be preserved. The confrontation was tense and laden with emotion. In the back of the nearly empty cafe, Jameson sat with his head bowed, guilt flickering in his eyes as he faced the accusing stares of his former colleagues. Thatcher's voice was cold and unwavering as he presented the irrefutable evidence. "Jameson, you have been siphoning funds, compromising our security, and collaborating with Whitmore. Your actions have endangered not only our operation but the lives of everyone who believes in our cause." Jameson trembled, his voice cracking as he attempted to explain. I did it for my family. They're in debt, and I thought if I could help Whitmore, I could secure our future. I never intended for it to go so far." Callista's eyes burned with a mixture of anger and pity. "You betrayed all of us for selfish reasons. In doing so, you've endangered the chance for a better future, for all of us." As Jameson's confession hung heavy in the air, the betrayal was laid bare, and with it, the full scope of the conspiracy began to tighten its grip on the situation. But even as the dust of betrayal settled, a glimmer of redemption emerged. Jameson, remorseful and broken, pleaded for forgiveness, offering to reveal everything he knew about Whitmore's network and the hidden connections that had enabled the financial manipulations. His information, though costly, could be the final key to dismantling the enemy's operation. Thatcher exchanged a long, measured glance with Callista. With a sigh heavy with the burden of leadership and personal loss, he finally spoke. "Jameson, if you truly wish to make amends, you will help us expose everyone involved. This isn't just about you, it's about saving our future and the future of countless others who have suffered under this shadow." In that somber moment, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the cafe's dusty windows, Jameson nodded weakly. "I will, Thatcher. I swear I'll tell you everything." Though trust had been shattered, Thatcher and Callista recognized that this painful betrayal might ultimately serve as the catalyst for the redemption they so desperately needed. As they left the cafe together, a heavy silence accompanied them, a silence filled with sorrow for what was lost, but also with the cautious hope that truth and reconciliation might yet prevail. Their journey through betrayal had left scars, but it also forged an unbreakable bond between them. In the midst of deceit and darkness, they had found strength in each other's resolve. And as they prepared to take the next steps in their fight against Whitmore's corrupt network, both knew that, together, they would confront whatever challenges lay ahead, undaunted, united, and determined to reclaim their future from the hands of treachery. Under a sky washed with the gentle hues of twilight, Everly Hills looked transformed, a place where the scars of past turmoil seemed to melt into the promise of a new beginning. In a secluded corner of the Alpine View Hotel, the very suite that had forced Thatcher Kingsley and Callista Everhart together on that fateful stormy night was being prepared for a celebration that would mark the culmination of their arduous journey. The room had been meticulously arranged with soft, glowing lanterns, fresh bouquets of white roses, and delicate strands of fairy lights draped artfully across the walls. Every detail had been chosen to evoke a sense of rebirth and hope, a striking contrast to the bitter corporate battles and heart-wrenching betrayals that had once threatened to tear them apart. Outside, the snow had finally ceased, leaving a sparkling carpet over the landscape, a quiet metaphor for the cleansing of old wounds. Thatcher stood by the grand window, his gaze fixed on the horizon where dusk and dawn merged in a gentle embrace. His mind replayed every moment of the past weeks, the desperate investigations, the painful confrontations with treacherous insiders, and the harrowing rescue that had forged an unbreakable bond between him and Callista. Each memory, though steeped in pain, had led him to this moment of quiet triumph and renewed commitment. He felt the weight of responsibility for his family's legacy, yet in Callista's unwavering eyes, he saw the strength and forgiveness that promised a future defined not by corporate sabotage or bitter rivalries, but by genuine love and reconciliation. Callista emerged from the adjoining room, her figure graceful and resolute, yet softened by the experiences that had shaped her. Her eyes, once filled with guarded skepticism, now sparkled with cautious optimism and warmth. As she approached, she caught sight of Thatcher's hand resting on the windowsill, a silent invitation, a promise of unspoken understanding. Without a word, she joined him there, the two standing side by side as if the years of mistrust had finally been washed away by the gentle light of hope. In a voice that trembled with both vulnerability and determination, Thatcher finally spoke, "Callista, through every moment of darkness, you've been my light. I've fought my demons and the betrayals of my past, and I know now that no matter how treacherous the journey, our love can guide us forward. I cannot promise that the road ahead will be free of challenges, but I vow to stand by you, always." Callista turned to face him, her expression tender and earnest. "Thatcher, I have learned that love is not about being free from pain, but about choosing each other despite it. I once feared that our beginnings were nothing more than a series of unfortunate coincidences. But every trial, every tear, has only deepened my conviction that we are meant to build something real together. I choose you, and I choose this future, no matter the cost." As their words hung in the soft air of the elegantly decorated suite, a gentle melody began to play, a carefully chosen piece of classical music that resonated with the rhythm of their intertwined hearts. Friends and loyal allies, who had stood by them through the darkest conspiracies and corporate betrayals, gathered discreetly in the background to offer their congratulations. The room became a quiet testament to transformation, where once there had been manipulation and fear, now there was trust, healing, and the promise of unity. In a gesture as symbolic as it was heartfelt, Thatcher reached into his pocket and produced a small, intricately carved box. Opening it slowly, he revealed a delicate ring, its band etched with motifs of intertwined vines and soft blossoms, a design that evoked both strength and grace. "Callista," he said, his voice steady despite the emotions surging within him, "will you marry me? Will you join me not just in love, but in the rebuilding of our futures, both personal and shared?" Tears welled in Callista's eyes as she realized that this proposal was more than a promise of eternal affection, it was a declaration that together they could overcome even the deepest of betrayals, that their union would be a beacon for both families to finally put aside old grudges and embrace a future filled with trust and compassion. "Yes, Thatcher," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of every sacrifice and every hope. "Yes, I will." In that timeless moment, as the soft glow of lanterns merged with the rising light of dawn, the echoes of past pain were gently replaced by the vibrant promise of tomorrow. The love that had been kindled by circumstance and nurtured through shared adversity now shone brightly, a testament to the strength of two souls determined to redefine destiny. And as they embraced, the Alpine View Hotel's suite transformed into a sanctuary of hope, where forever truly began that unforgettable night.